Good morning. I wanted to add another entry, I guess, to the log. Today's list that I've got on my, well, you can't see it because I'm a puppet, but this is a phone. You can see that my hand is transparent, apparently. I've updated the word tracking software, so I'm noticing that this is going a little slower than normal, but I think I'm okay with that. In any case, today's topics: mandalas, how they work and why, the concept of healing, an update on the pinball machine from yesterday's talk, an update on the fugue state from last year where I was basically in meditation, if you want to say it that way, for like 2 months, current status and recovery, the concept of acclimating to new resonances, and then ending with higher state of consciousness. And I outline them here at the outset or inset perhaps, because I probably won't address all of these topics directly, but fundamentally, the mandala is the sand ornaments that, uh, what is it, like Buddhist monks or whatever, like, forgive me if I'm like way off there, but, they tap a little tube with sand, one, little grain at a time, basically, and then they build this humongous sand picture. And it takes, weeks, months, these depending on the size, right? And they're there all day, just like tap, tap, tap. And, however many of them are participating. And then this process is meditative. So they build this, very ornate geometric image. And they're really cool. I've never made one, but um, so they spend all this time on it, and then they kind of like, when it's done, they enjoy, the presence of this creation that they've made, and then they sweep it all up in like a pile, and then disperse the sand back into nature. And you do it with feeling, so it's not like you just dump it in the trash or you just dump it in the water or on the, sand barge or whatever. Like, it's ritualized, so there's different places where they'll disperse it and whatnot. But the other thing is, the sand is sort of treated with its own sort of soul, I guess, right? The sand is looked at like it's on its own adventure. And if it doesn't get put in the water in 2 weeks, when the little kid is supposed to go put his little baggie of sand in the water, then it wasn't supposed to happen. And then you find out 6 years later, when the kid's grown up and he's going off to college, that he finds the little sandbaggie under the TV and the mantelpiece. And then he goes, oh yeah. And maybe at that point he goes out back and dumps it in the yard or something. But for the 6 years that the sand was idle, it was not removed from the system. It was the system reorganizing itself. It put the sand put itself somewhere where it wanted to be for the duration of time it needed to be there. And then it reintroduces into the environment. And the same with the other sand. It finds its place and settles at the bottom of, the riverbed or whatever. And then a crab collects some of it, and, the cycle of life, right? And over X amount of time, eventually maybe one of those grains of sand makes its way back into another mandala. And this is the recycling, you know. That's the true recycling, is how nature does it, not this like plastic bottle melting nonsense. It's technically recycling, right? But it's not the formalized recycling. And I apologize for the windows sound effects there. I thought I turned those off, but apparently not. So thanks Windows for that. Let's see if I can't mute a couple of these things here. And that should be hopefully better. The background ambient probably drained out just now briefly for a second, but this cyclical nature, this recycling, is the essence of what nature is, what reality is, what the function of interactions is. So all of that wave nonsense I was talking about before follows the same principles. They're recycled energies. The food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the sun you receive, etc. Right? And I don't want to like name every item because everything is part of the program. The light coming out of this screen right now with the color of, the hand shape and these lights and the FPS, like all of that is a type of energy being transferred. And by design, my little cutout here of space-time is creating something. I can't really describe the effects to you. I don't know what the middle portion of the scale is, right? We can do macro, we can do micro, but we don't know the middle part. And I forgot the name for it. I learned it the other day again. I forgot what it was already. In any case, observing, knowing, understanding the cyclical nature of things, we can sort of now open up to this idea of healing. And yesterday, I discussed the pinball machine. I took it apart and figured out that there were 20 little marbles in it. I didn't mention whether or not I put it back together, and I did. It took a lot longer than it did to take it apart, but I got there. When you put something back together like that, you learn how the thing works, especially if in the middle of taking it apart you forgot how to put it all back together in the first place. Maybe you didn't track it because you're 10 years old sitting at the kitchen table with a bunch of marbles all over the table from the pinball machine you got just a couple months before that for Christmas. And you're afraid you're gonna get in trouble when, mom comes home and sees you made a mess in the kitchen. So you're in a panic and you're trying to put the thing back together. It was fun. And what was more fun was learning how the device works, because then you tool around with it and you realize, well, it works. The scoring mechanism works because there's a little ring around the bumper, and the bumper has a metal, strip, and the metal strip has electricity, and when the marble touches it, the base plate that the marble's rolling on is electrically charged, and so when it closes the circuit on the little spring that's on the bumper, it ticks one of the points, and whatever the circuitry in there, it starts ticking. So you learn this. And of course, like any good classic cheater, I bounce the marble on it a bunch of times and get a high score, yay, right? Eventually you put it all back together, and it works. It works fine. You might realize, oops, I have an extra screw, but if the machine works, you've at least achieved the knowledge of how it works, and maybe the discovery that you forgot to put one screw somewhere. Yes, it came out of the machine, it needs to go back, but the machine works. So you can ask maybe the question of whether or not the screw was required. If you go even further, you can probably start getting into like the ship of Theseus argument and that sort of thing, right? If you're not familiar with that one, maybe we'll save that for another time. So, my 2-month meditation. I was having a lot of mental distress last year. Recently, not recently now, but recently back then, this is being injected into the story, right? So there was a point when I realized I'm just like overstressed, right? This is burnout territory, you know, burnout's dangerous. So you get a chance to heal, to recover, to remove stress. For me, that was always like a meditation type thing. Literally just relaxing, laying down, maybe have mild noise in the background or TV show or music, and just be in that stew. So you do that, and, and I ended up in that meditation. And it just clicked one day. I was just in a meditation, and it wasn't like, you know, blackout meditation where it's like everything's gone. It was more of like a elevated, the mental projection of looking down at yourself while you're watching yourself live your life. It was like, you know, you see my puppet here. If you can imagine, the actor performing the puppet is behind. If the puppet were me, then the perspective I had was the puppeteer behind, looking at myself, watching the world. And that was a very interesting period of time because I learned a lot about how I make decisions, about how my physical interacts with the other physical, or in addition, actually, how my physical interacts with the non-physical, the mind. The interactions go both ways. The mind affects the body affects the mind. What you eat, what you breathe, what you drink, what you think, what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, goes back and forth. It's a big system that talks back and forth all the time. I did an experiment while I was in that meditative state where I had my thumbs touching. I'm not sure if this puppet will capture the other hand. Yeah. So I had the two thumbs and I was staring at them. And I was waiting. They weren't touching. They were just slightly apart, you know. And I was staring at them. And I waited. And as I was waiting, I had like a split in my brain, I guess, occur. That my right thumb and my left thumb were two different parts of myself. And then there was a competition. Which one would move first? So they got real stiff. And then, wouldn't you know, my thumb moved first. And I say my thumb because that's the perspective I had. My left thumb was not my thumb, but it was my thumb, but it just wasn't like the me that I meant when I was speaking. I had control over both, but in that moment where I was releasing that control, I allowed each half of the brain to control one. So my thumb moved first, and then my other thumb, this one, which I would in the moment refer to as like the subconscious, was all stern, like disciplinary style, like, no, you can't move. So like we held thumbs again. And then it was like training day, you know, my right thumb was going to listen to the left thumb and we were going to be, you know, united. And that break, that's what set the stage for a lot of interesting realizations. And I spent about 2 days in this like split brain thing. If you can imagine driving, don't do that. But um, I kind of scared myself a little bit because it was like my right hand was like me controlling the steering wheel, my right foot was me controlling the gas and the brake pedal, and my left side was just kind of wanting to do its own thing. And I know that if you ever study those split brain patients, right? Corpus calostomy, I think it's called. I have a poem on that, but that's not for today. Um, split brain patient will not recognize the other half of the body. It'll do whatever it's going to do. And some of the experimentation is pretty cool. They will flash like a picture on the screen, but there's two images, and they'll flash, and so they'll ask the patient, hey, what did you see? And they'll go, oh, I saw a rabbit or something, right? I saw a rabbit or a bunny. And they say, okay. And then they put a few items on the table in front of them, and then they ask, do you recognize any of these items? And so not the patient controlling the hand, but the subconscious, the other half of the brain that's not like conscious, so to speak, will grab an item off the table, and it's like a toy car or something, right? And then the picture that was flashed on the other screen was a toy car. So it's a rabbit and a toy car flash. And the conscious mind only sees the one, subconscious one sees the other one. And I was, in a way, like experiencing this halvesies, both ways. I was getting the feedback that the subconscious, unconscious brain was doing, and then also I was having my normal control. Benefits, pros and cons, right? Well, interesting from a data perspective, pro. Scary from a I want to walk and use the bathroom perspective, con. Um, higher artistic capabilities, pro. And I call it a pro because visualizations like this I never had before that. I intuited these in my mind. I mathematically understood it, but to connect principles through these kinds of graphical mechanics, and to then connect that idea, let's say, to how to draw it, how to program it, how to think about it, how to work with it, how to describe it. That was the other part of the brain, and I got to see a perspective of that brain doing that activity from like a blind perspective. Like I wasn't the one processing it, I was witnessing something else working on it and then providing the answer when it achieved it. I haven't had that again, but I have attempted to try to like solicit that experience again because it was really interesting and cool, and I'd like to study it more. But in any case, the recovery process for me finished when that was done. And I kind of had like a motivation to extract all of whatever is in here and put it out there. So I was already writing the poems by that point. In fact, I think I had finished the collection that I had made. I hadn't written any more stories or anything, but what I was doing was I was capturing all of them. I was putting them all in one place, so hence the website, just a place to dump everything, to get it out of here, because I'm tired of letting this fill up, which is why I think these little videos here are kind of cathartic for me. It's a way to get all of this stuff out, because if you can imagine the density of the information that we're talking about now, I'd write it all out in like a poem or some story or something, and it was always translated instead of direct. And this is direct because it's just the words as the thoughts are happening instead of like some mystical arts, mage from the 20th, whatever, minus BC century. Like none of that. So this is just direct, right? What do they say? Direct download. um, and in sequence, the next item is acclimating to new resonance. So recovery, healing, coming out of that, acclimating. What does acclimating mean? It means adjusting, acclimatizing, right? To be equilibrium, or to reach equilibrium through a change in climate. Acclimatizing. This is my definition anyway. You can look up Webster's or whatever, I don't care. But when I hear the word acclimatizing or acclimating, it's for me when you go to the store and you get a fish and you leave the fish in the bag and you put the bag in the fish tank and you let the water temperature equalize and then you let the fish out of the bag. That is acclimating, right? That's the essence of acclimating. So the mental state of, we'll call it a high frequency, or maybe low, I don't know. Things are subjective these days. To re-enter the world, to re-enter society with this new knowledge, or maybe old knowledge. And then it's like, you hear people say that the blinders have been removed, or the color lenses have been put on, or the veil has been lifted, right? You hear all of these revelation kinds of statements. And it's not like, occult knowledge or something. This was more of like just the simplistic baseline nature of reality, right? When they say like, are you a realistic thinker? It was like that. Like you just, at face value, what is the thing? It's a binary answer. It's Boolean. What is it? It's left or it's right. It's yes or it's no. And re-entering, regrounding, re-acclimatizing to that was interesting because the thoughts go so fast. To be allowed to let that keep going, but then at the same time process the slow stuff was I'm just thankful for that because I never had that. I was always running 1,000,000 miles an hour, but in the moment. So you can say I was speeding along laterally instead of vertically. So now I'm vertically speeding along, but because I'm vertically speeding along, whatever's vertically less than that is easy to work with at that point. It's a cakewalk. It's nothing. Whereas before my orientation, I guess, was lateral. So I might have been doing 100 miles an hour, but I was ping-ponging from left to right, so I was never able to keep center somewhere. Which brings me to the last item of higher state of consciousness. I mentioned in the previous video or two the character Brian and the meditative 12th dimension state that he had reached. I came up with 12 for many reasons, but my orientation of time and space is different, the stacking of them. And as we know, space-time is connected, right? If there's more space, there's less time. If there's more time, there's less space, and so on and so forth, right? So there's that inverse relationship, I think, is the description. So when you squish one, the other one expands. Most people put the dimension first. They say, forward and back, left and right, up and down. 3 dimensions. And then they go, oh yeah, and then there's time, right? So I'm going to meet you at this longitude, at this latitude, at this elevation, at this time of day, on this day of the year. Cool, right? That's 4 dimensions. Makes sense. Apologies, my automation is firing off here. I have to turn this off because it makes noise. Interesting. That clock is 2 minutes slow. Okay. I was trying to time myself. Missed. Apparently I wasn't looking at the correct clock. But anyway, 4 dimensions, right? So you have your 3 for space, 1 for time. But most people put time at the end after the dimensions. I put time first. I put time first because it's the only one that's, at least in our comprehension of dimensional space, the one that is intangible. We can't reverse it. We can't fast forward it. We can't lateralize it. It's the only intangible one. And there's only one intangible dimension, which is the sort of like zeroth dimension, as they say, right? Because the zeroth dimension is a point. It's a infinitely dense, small, singular point that has like no area, no mass, no up and down. There's nothing. It's just like a dot, and like no matter where you try to get to it, it's always like just out of reach. And then there's the first dimension, which is just literally a line, right? Like just one line, left to right. And then you have 2 dimensions, which is your left to right, up and down. And then you have your 3 dimensions, which is the left to right, up and down, forward and back. So that's your cube. So if you had time first and then you add your 3 dimensions, you still end up at 4. You can still arrive at this longitude, latitude, and elevation at this particular time. But it opens up an interesting pivotal, which is that you can pivot the other way. Like if you had, our dimension space-time is here, and then you did a pivot like this, like the Penrose diagram, they would, rotate around. And it also opens up the opportunity for spatial dimensional increases because each axis is no longer limited by time as the extensor. Now each directional axis has its own pivot where you can add 3 more dimensions when you square it. And then you can do it again, and then again, and then again. And then you end up with the fractal, and then you end up with Fibonacci, and blah, 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 blah. So the character Brian arrives at the 12th pivot in the physical dimension up, if you want to call it that. It's not the correct word because even like the 5th dimension up is no longer a concept that makes any sense. 4th dimension might even be questionable, but tesseracts are kind of easy to comprehend, in my opinion. A 5-dimensional tesseract, or it's not even a tesseract, I don't remember the name of it, but hypercube or whatever, the whatever the name is. I don't think in names of things. I'm not good with names, but rotations, vectors, angles, right? If you had a drawer with index cards or file cabinet with drawer, and then you pulled a file out, and then on the piece of paper there was a 3-dimensional thing, and then you picked, a row and a column from that one, and then you open that drawer, and then you do it again and again and again. It's just an easy example, but vectors, multiplication, matrices, matrix multiplications, vector arrays, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm getting into like computer terminology, but it's the same. And that higher state of consciousness is interesting because you're not only now looking at yourself living out there, you're watching that watcher, and you're watching the watcher that's watching you. And like if you elevate that out a few times and you stack them, you kind of realize you're not watching anything external. you're only ever watching things internally. And the only closest approximation for how to picture that is one of those fisheye lens cameras views where you see, like, the person's got the selfie stick, right? And then behind them is the shape of the orb that the fisheye lens makes, and it looks like a tiny Earth. And then this big giant just kind of sticking out right at the camera. That's the only mental image I can give you for now. And that's only basically not even the fourth dimension. That's barely scraping the surface of the fourth dimension. But that's the only imagery I can kind of bring that can help illuminate the perspective. Mandalas. 8-dimensional quasi-crystals. 8D. I believe it was 8D quasi-crystal. Anyway, there's a really cool video on that. You have some homework, I guess. Unless you've already done it, in which case I think we have a lot to talk about.